11,000 years ago, the Sahara was not a desert. It was green. Rivers, lakes, hippos, herds of cattle, and entire tribes of people living where there is now nothing but sand to the horizon. And for decades, the world's best scientists said the way it got that green should have been impossible. Now, satellites are catching the edges of the Sahara turning green again. So what happens to the rest of the world, and to you, if the largest hot desert on Earth comes back to life? Hold on to that question. The answer is the last thing you'll hear in this video, and it is not the answer you're expecting. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll understand why a desert you may never set foot in is quietly deciding the fate of a forest you cannot live without. To understand what's happening now, you have to start with a photograph that made no sense to the man who took it. In 1933, deep in the mountains of southwest Egypt, an explorer crawled into a cave, lifted his lamp to the wall, and found people swimming. Not symbols, not gods. Human figures, arms stretched forward, legs kicking, frozen mid-stroke across the rock. The site is now called the Cave of Swimmers, and it sits in one of the most extreme dry zones on the planet, a place where rain might fall once in a decade, if at all. Someone painted those swimmers roughly 8,000 years ago, and that creates an impossible problem, because you cannot paint people swimming in a place that has never had water. The water, it turns out, was only the beginning of what was there, and those swimmers are not a one-off. Hundreds of kilometers away, on a sandstone plateau in southern Algeria called Tassili Nadjer, there are more than 15,000 paintings and engravings carved into the rock across thousands of years. One of the largest collections of prehistoric art anywhere on Earth. They show herds of cattle being driven across open grassland, hunters chasing animals that need savanna to live, and lakes full of life. It is, in effect, a photo album of a green Sahara, painted by the people who actually lived in it. And the further you dig into that album, the stranger the landscape behind it becomes. Right in the very center of the Sahara, there was once a lake so vast it would dwarf almost anything we have today. Geologists call it Lake Megachad, and at its peak, it covered around 360,000 square kilometers, larger than the entire country of Germany, bigger than any freshwater lake on Earth right now. Today, what remains of it, Lake Chad, has shrunk to less than a 20th of that size, a puddle by comparison. The Sahara did not simply have a few scattered oases. It had an inland sea large enough to be seen from space. And that sea was full of things your mind refuses to place there. Crocodiles, hippos, giant catfish the length of a grown adult. Across the modern Sahara, researchers keep pulling fish bones, crocodile teeth, and hippo remains straight out of the open dunes. Animals that need deep, permanent water to survive, lying in the very heart of the largest desert on the planet. In Niger, at a site called Gobero, archaeologists uncovered an entire lakeside graveyard buried under the sand. Around 200 human skeletons, fishhooks carved from bone, harpoon points, and the remains of perch and turtles, all left by people who lived and fished beside water that has been gone for thousands of years. Scientists gave this lost world a name, the African Humid Period, the Green Sahara. And the most unsettling part is not that it existed, it is how fast it vanished. We are not guessing about that speed either. Off the coast of West Africa, scientists drilled deep into the ocean floor and pulled up cores of mud laid down layer by layer over thousands of years. Buried in those layers is a record of exactly how much desert dust was blowing off the continent at any given moment. And the cores show something chilling. The dust didn't creep up slowly. It spiked. The green, rainy world held steady for thousands of years. And then, around 5,500 years ago, the dust signal jumped. The sign of a landscape drying out not over millennia, but in some regions over a few centuries or less. A continent-sized garden, dotted with lakes and full of people, dried into the largest desert on the surface of the earth in less time than separates us from the height of the Roman Empire. Remember how fast that switch flipped. because it is the entire reason the question at the start of this video matters. Something flipped it. And it was not what you would ever guess. It was not an asteroid. It was not a war or a plague. It was not even human beings. It was the planet itself, slowly wobbling. The Earth does not spin perfectly upright. Its axis traces a slow circle, like a spinning top just beginning to tip, completing one full wobble roughly every 21,000 years. That wobble changes how much summer sunlight strikes North Africa. And during the Green Sahara, the region was receiving close to 7% more summer sunlight than it does today. That extra heat supercharged the African monsoon, dragging the planet's tropical rain belt hundreds of kilometers north into land that is now bone dry. The scientific word for that wobble is precession. Hold on to that word too, because precession means this has happened before, far more times than you think. And it means something else, something personal. Those green corridors did not just feed cattle and crocodiles. They were the highway. When the Sahara was green, it became a vast network of lakes and rivers that early humans could follow north and out of the continent. A passage that may have shaped some of the very migrations that carried our species across the rest of the planet. The desert that looks like a barrier on the map was, again and again, the door. And when the door slammed shut, when the rains pulled back and the lakes dried, the people did not simply vanish with them. They had to follow the water. As the Green Sahara collapsed, populations were squeezed out of the drying interior and pushed toward the one reliable river left standing, the Nile. Some researchers argue that this very squeeze helped concentrate people along the Nile Valley in the centuries right before the rise of ancient Egypt. In other words, one of the most famous civilizations in human history may owe part of its existence to a desert drying out and herding people toward a river, which makes it all the stranger that we still treat the Sahara as something fixed and permanent. Because you picture the Sahara as a permanent feature of the planet. It is on every map. It has been there your entire life, and your grandparents' lives, and every life in recorded history. It is not permanent at all. Driven by that same orbital wobble, the Sahara has flipped back and forth between green grassland and barren desert more than 230 times over the last 8 million years. Read that number again. It is not a desert that occasionally turns green. It is a switch. A planet-sized switch that has been thrown more than 200 times. And right now, it simply happens to be set to desert. Which brings us to the one thing the world's best scientists genuinely could not explain. When researchers tried to recreate the Green Sahara inside their climate models, the very same models we trust to predict our future, the models failed. They could not generate anywhere close to enough rainfall to turn the Sahara into grassland and lakes. The fossils, the lake beds, the rock paintings, and the buried skeletons all screamed that it had happened. The physics inside the computer insisted it was impossible. Scientists were so stumped, they gave the contradiction its own name, the Green Sahara problem. And this is the part that matters most. That gap is not a theory or a scare story. It is hard measurement colliding with prediction. The Earth did something real, something written permanently into the rock and the sea floor that our most advanced science still cannot fully reproduce. And now, that supposedly impossible thing may be beginning all over again. Except this time, we are here to watch it happen. Directly below the Sahara lies a wide band of semi-dry land called the Sahel, stretching across Africa from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. Since the 1980s, satellites have been measuring something there that nobody predicted. It is getting greener. Measurably, season after season, year after year, vegetation has been creeping back across land that everyone had written off as lost to the advancing desert. This is not a projection from a model. It is a photograph taken from orbit, repeated for more than 40 years. Researchers debate the exact mix of causes: recovering rainfall, shifting monsoon patterns, even the way rising carbon dioxide can act like a fertilizer for hardy desert plants. But the direction itself is not in dispute. In places, the edge of the Great Desert is retreating. And humans are pushing on that edge too. Across 11 countries, stretching some 8,000 kilometers from coast to coast, people are planting what they call the Great Green Wall, a living barrier of trees and restored grassland meant to hold the desert back and bring the land to life. Some stretches have failed. Others are quietly working, turning cracked, abandoned ground back into farmland and forest. It is the largest deliberate attempt in history to green a desert on purpose. And it is happening right now while you watch this, which raises a real question for you before we go any further. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Because if you live anywhere, the planet's great rainbelts reach: the Americas, Europe, West Africa, the Caribbean. What is happening to this desert reaches your part of the world too. And by the end, you will see exactly how. Drop your location in the comments. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Now the part that turns this from a curiosity into something far larger. Some climate models now suggest that a warming world could strengthen the African monsoon and push the Sahara to begin greening again. Not in 10,000 years, the way the orbital cycle alone would schedule it, but possibly within a single century. Within a human lifetime. Possibly within yours. I want to be completely honest with you here. This is not certain, and serious scientists disagree about how far it would go and how fast it would arrive. But it has crossed the line from science fiction into real, peer-reviewed projection. The switch that has been thrown more than 200 times before may already be starting to move under our feet. And if that just shifted something in the way you see the next 100 years, you already know what the like button is for. It is the simplest way to push this in front of more people who have no idea any of this is happening. So let's return to the question I asked you at the very start. A green Sahara. More rain, more grassland, more life, more carbon pulled down out of the sky and locked into growing plants. On the surface, that sounds like the single best piece of environmental news imaginable. It sounds like the planet quietly healing itself. Here is the first crack in that beautiful idea. Every single year, the Sahara lifts somewhere around 180 million tons of fine dust off its surface and flings it into the sky. The single largest source of that dust is one small, brutal place in the nation of Chad called the Bodélé Depression, officially the dustiest spot on the entire planet. And here is the cruel detail. The Bodélé Depression is the dried-out floor of that vanished inland sea, Lake Mega Chad. The lake that once held crocodiles and hippos is now the greatest dust engine on Earth, grinding its ancient bed into powder and hurling it into the wind for days at a time. Stand on that ground during one of its storms, and you would not see the sun at all. Only a wall of ochre haze swallowing the horizon, fine grit working its way into everything, the air itself turned solid and moving. That dust does something almost no one realizes. It is reaching across an entire ocean to hold back the storms that slam into your coastline. That dry, dust-choked air rolling westward off the Sahara has a name: the Saharan air layer. As it sweeps out over the Atlantic, it smothers hurricanes before they can fully organize. The dry air starves them of the moisture they need, and the dust and strong winds tear at their structure. In simple terms, more desert means more dust, and more dust means more storms suppressed out at sea before they ever reach land. So a quieter, dustier Sahara is one of the hidden reasons some of your hurricane seasons stay calmer than they otherwise would, which means a greener, gentler Sahara would do the opposite, sending fewer storms to an early end and letting more of them grow strong and turn toward the Caribbean, the Gulf, and the eastern coast of the United States. But even that is not the part that turns this entire story completely inside out. And before we get there, understand that none of this is some abstract process happening only over the open ocean. That same Saharan dust regularly crosses the entire Atlantic and arrives over Florida, Texas, and the islands of the Caribbean. Thick enough, in certain years, to turn the midday sky a pale, hazy brown, and to light up sunsets in colors that look like they belong on another planet. In 2020, A single plume so enormous that forecasters nicknamed it Godzilla rolled all the way from Africa into the southern United States. If you live anywhere along that path, the odds are good that, at least once in your life, the air you pulled into your lungs was lifted off the floor of a vanished African lake. You have already breathed the Sahara. Most people just never knew its name. Here is the secret the Sahara has been hiding for this whole video. Of all that dust the desert throws into the sky, a specific portion of it drifts more than 5,000 kilometers across the Atlantic Ocean and settles on one particular place on the far side of the world, the Amazon rainforest. Satellites that fire lasers down through the atmosphere have actually traced the plume, year after year, leaving Africa and arriving over South America roughly a week later. And the amount is staggering, on the order of 27 million tons of African dust landing on the Amazon basin every single year. That dust is not just dirt. It is carrying roughly 22,000 tons of phosphorus, the one critical nutrient the Amazon's ancient rain-washed soil is desperately short of and cannot replace on its own. Let that settle for a moment. The greatest rainforest on Earth is fertilized, year after year, by the greatest desert on Earth. The Amazon is fed by the Sahara. The lungs of the planet are kept breathing, in part by a vanished lake in Chad, carried across an ocean on the wind. And the forest cannot simply make more phosphorus on its own. The Amazon soil is ancient and almost worn out, its nutrients washed away by thousands of years of heavy rain. The rainforest survives by frantically recycling the little it has, and by the thin, steady dusting of new phosphorus that blows in from across the sea each year to top it back up. Cut that supply, and the richest forest on Earth is left living off its savings. So follow the chain all the way to its end. A green Sahara means rain instead of drought. Rain instead of drought means the dust storms fade. No dust storms mean no river of powder crossing the Atlantic. And no powder crossing the Atlantic means the Amazon slowly loses its single largest natural source of phosphorus and quietly begins to starve. The wobble we called Precession does not just decide whether North Africa is green or brown. It silently decides whether South America's rainforest keeps breathing. The thing that looks like one part of the planet finally healing is, at the very same moment, the life support of another part being switched off. They are not two separate stories. They are one system, split by an ocean, stitched together by a river of dust that no human eye can see, and almost no one knows is there. This is what makes the Sahara so much more than sand. It is not a wasteland sitting uselessly in the middle of a continent. It is a planetary organ, a giant, slow-moving lever wired into the rainfall of 3 continents, the storms of the Atlantic, the path our own ancestors once walked, and the survival of the richest ecosystem on the surface of the Earth. When it turns green, the world does not simply get a little greener in one spot. The entire balance shifts in ways that reach all the way to your weather, your coastline, and the air the whole planet relies on the Amazon to clean. The Sahara has flipped between green and desert more than 230 times. And every single one of those flips happened in a world with no one here to witness it. No satellites, no measurements, no human beings keeping records. This may be the very first flip in the planet's long history that takes place with us standing directly in the middle of it. And even now, with all our instruments and all our science, we still cannot say for certain whether we are about to watch a desert come gloriously back to life, or watch a rainforest on the other side of the world fall silent as its hidden supply line is quietly cut. The strangest part is not that any of this could happen. It is that the switch is already moving, slowly, silently, beneath an ocean of sand that most people will never walk across and never think about again. The lever is turning, and the only thing left to find out is whether anyone is paying close attention while it does.